What's up guys, it's Phil, getting ready to do another project, so get your notebooks out, take some notes, watch this whole thing all the way through at least once. If you need any tips or tricks, feel free to comment below or send me an email and I'll be happy to answer your questions. But in the meantime, I'm going to give you pretty detailed instructions right here on the screen, so definitely check it out. But today, we're going to be building a single sliding barn door pantry. The dimensions on this thing, it's 50 inches across the top. It's a little over 18 inches deep depending on how you look at it, but plan on giving yourself enough space for about maybe 19.5 inches on the top. Maybe about 20 inches or so deep total, but if you want to make it any smaller, feel free to go ahead, write down the dimensions, write down the measurements, and make them to fit your space accordingly. But if not, 50 inches wide, 18 inches deep, and 8 foot tall. So, I'm going to go through a list real quick of the items that you need, and then we're going to go ahead and get started cutting. I'm going to show you guys how to put this thing together. Alright, so I already went ahead and figured out the first couple of things you're going to need. The main thing for this cabinet is that you're going to need 3 sheets of 1/2 inch plywood. Now my recommendation is that you get birch plywood, cabinet grade, something really nice, but I'm actually doing this project on a budget, so I'm going to be using yellow pine plywood. It's garbage, I hate it, but you know, it's a repeat client who wanted something dirt cheap, and so I'm trying to make her happy. These 4 posts I'm going to be making out of 2x4s, so I've not included that in my list here, but you need to go ahead and get yourself a couple of 2x4s or just find some of the scrap you've got laying on hand. We're going to make our own pieces for that. You're also going to need 1 piece of underlayment or 1/4 inch plywood, whatever you would prefer. For me, the underlayment's usually cheaper and looks a little bit nicer depending on if you're going to be painting it or finishing it. It's up to you, but check it out at your local large big box hardware store and or supplier, and look and see what you've got as far as the underlayment or 1/4 inch plywood goes. So you need 1 sheet of underlayment or 1/4 inch plywood, 3 sheets of 1/2 inch plywood, possibly up to 5 1x2s, and then we're going to make some track hardware. I'll talk about that a little bit later. You also need some 3/4 inch brad nails and some 1 inch or 1.5 inch brad nails depending on your specific needs. You need a really cool handle. I went to the unnamed big box store and got myself a nice gate handle because my client wanted a big handle for it. So this was like $4. Again, that keeps with the cheap stuff, which I kind of like for this project. You're also going to need some 2-inch drywall screws. And the reason that we use these is because they're coarse thread. They're pretty easy as far as putting all this stuff in. We're going to need some wood putty. I prefer plastic wood for this project because it goes on pink and it dries natural. It's also stainable and paintable, but we're only going to be filling in some small spots, and woo, looks like mine's pretty dry. So I'm going to be getting some new plastic wood, but that's what I recommend. If not, you can use your own specific wood putty brand. Other than that, we're going to be building a track. So for the track, you're going to need 2 4-foot sections of 1 inch by 1/8 inch steel weldable bar, because one of them is going to be the bar across the top, the other one is going to be split to be the 2 bars that make up our hardware. You're also going to need 2 of these. Now this is my preference for this kind of project, especially because we're working on keeping it cheap this go around, which for my client is just because she doesn't want to spend a lot of money, and for you guys at home it's because you don't want to spend a whole lot even though your wife expects you to. Or husband, I'm not judging. Anyway, I go for the 1.5 inch rigid steel pulley. I don't really know or care what that means, but what I do know is that this has this kind of pin pull thingy and a nice brass wheel on the inside. This is super easy to take apart and super easy to manage making your own barn door hardware, which I'll show you guys a little bit later. I've also covered another version of barn door hardware in a different video, so you guys can go check that out if you'd like to. You're also going to need this 1/2 inch steel tubing. I'm sorry that I don't know exact specifics on it, but just go look for it. It's a nice long bar. Now this one I've already cut down a couple of times, so again I apologize that I don't know the exact dimensions on it, but just go look for it. It's like a 1/2 inch diameter. It's right there with the welded steel, so you can't miss it. It comes in a 48-inch section, so pick yourself up some of that. You'll need your wood screws, and we're also going to need some finish washers. Now, finishing washers are pretty amazing because on projects like this, these are pretty awesome because all you have to do is take this over-rounded half moon thing, and your number 6 drywall screw fits right through there with the threading, and it sits perfectly inside there, which makes for a really nice finish. And you don't have to worry about, you know, polishing up your steel after you cut it and all that kind of stuff. So definitely pick yourself up a pack of these. Again, you can get these at your, you know, big box hardware store and whatnot. These are number 6 specifically because I have number 6 2-inch drywall screws that I'm going to be using for this project. You will need a couple of 1-inch drywall screws. Again, number 6 1-inch drywall screws. I got these so that we can put them in the bottoms of the doors and also use them for some of the smaller pieces that we've got on this project. Alright, so let's go. So the first thing we've got to do is make our cuts. So on the 3 plywood pieces, we're going to cut 1, 2, 3, 4 18-inch pieces. 1 at 22.5 and 1 at 23. Okay, that's the first thing we're going to do. Then, this 12-inch and this 12-inch really become scrap. This 23-inch, you could then cut 17.25-inch pieces. We're going to cut 5 of those out from 1 8-inch piece of plywood. These are going to be our shelves. This is going to be our door body. These are going to be our sides. This is going to be our center. This one's going to be our top. This one's going to be our bottom, but we're going to end up cutting another inch off it to make it 17 inches. Okay, so go ahead and write all this down, take a note. I really don't have a way to make this easier on this video, unfortunately, but screenshot this, do whatever you need to do. But these are going to be your plywood pieces. This 12-inch doesn't matter. This 12-inch doesn't matter. These are going to be our shelves. This is going to be our door. And then our piece of underlayment is going to stay 48 inches across, and we're going to cut it down to fit the piece. By the way, I'm not sure if I actually showed you this, but this is the piece we're going to be making. So it has one sliding barn door that's going to slide side to side, 2 shelves on this side, 3 shelves on this side, which is 5 shelves, makes it just a little bit easier, and plus you have a reason for having the barn door, otherwise it's kind of pointless. It's going to be 8 foot tall, 50 inches across. It's going to have a 3.5-inch foot, and it's going to be roughly 18 inches deep, but depending on the trim, it might be a little bit deeper than that. Alright, so let's get going on this project. I'm going to start cutting the plywood, and after we've cut the plywood, we'll come back and cut all the trim, and after that, we'll come back and work on the door itself, and finally, we'll work on the hardware and get this thing all put together. So I've got my top and bottom cut, as well as all of my shelves, and now it is time to go ahead and start cutting the sides and the center. So I'm going to cut 3 of these 18-inch pieces into 92.5-inch pieces. So I'm going to be taking roughly 3.5 inches off of each piece. So those will make up my 2 sides here, and my centerpiece here. I've already got the top and bottom and the 2 for this side and 1, 2, 3 shelves for this side already cut, and then we'll worry about the backing after this. Right now, just cut 3 at 92.5 inches long out of those 18-inch pieces that we cut earlier. Alright, so I've got all of my plywood sheets cut up and prepared the proper sizes. I've got the door piece cut. I've got the two sides in the center. I've also got the top and bottom cut as well. So the last thing I'm going to do, and then we're going to go ahead and start putting the cabinet together, is I'm going to cut the 4 posts that are going to be essentially the legs. I'm going to cut those out of 2x4. So I'm going to take a 2x4 and cut out a 2x2 or 2 if I can get them out of it, and using that I'm then going to notch out or dado out a channel for the plywood to fit in. So I'm going to show you how to do that and give you the exact measurements here so that you guys can understand all the crap I just said, because it probably didn't make any sense at all. Alright, so here's how we do this. It's pretty simple. I'm going to set my fence at 1 1/2 inches. It's off just a little bit. There we go. So pretty simple. I'm cutting to exactly 1 1/2 inches. I also need this to be thick enough to go completely through the 2x4. That should work. And I'm going to rip the whole 2x4 down and get 4 pieces. So I'm probably going to end up using 2 2x4s, but I want 4 8-foot sections of 1x2. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a pass to rip it, make another pass to rip the second piece out. Once I've got those 2 pieces, I'm going to flip it on its side, rip it again, and that'll give me a 1 1/2 by 1 1/2 square block at 8 foot long. So guys, I forgot to mention, the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to set my fence just shy of 3 1/2 inches, and I'm going to rip off the first edge on both of the 2x4s. So I'm going to rip off that rounded edge so I've got a nice clean edge to start with. Then I'm going to reset it at 1 1/2 inches like I just showed you a second ago. Alright, so I'm going to do that first, then I'm going to rip out my 2 blocks. Now this part can be done with a dado blade or very simply with a table saw with a fence like I'm about to do here. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to be cutting out 1/2 inch to make room for our plywood. So I'm going to measure 1/2 inch, but here's the key. It's from this side of the fence to the outer kerf of my blade. Okay, and that's crucial because my guide here is actually set perfectly to the inner kerf. So the outer kerf of this blade right here I need to make sure is just at 1/2 inch, which it is, so that should be perfect. So I'm going to set that right there. Stage 2 is I only want it to be 1/2 inch deep. So I'm going to make sure that the highest point, and by the way this is unplugged while I'm doing this, I'm going to make sure that the highest point of my blade is right at 1/2 inch. Now all I have to do is flip it over long ways to short ways, and I'm going to cut the dado going on the left edge. I'll show you here. I know it's confusing. So now I've got that cut, essentially dadoed out, 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. It's going to be the inside, so I don't really care that I wasn't exactly perfect right there in the corner, but it doesn't really matter. looks pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this 4 more times, and then that's it for the cuts we're gonna do right now. We'll start assembling the cabinet. Side pieces are cut, dadoed out. I'm actually not going to shorten them at all because the plywood that's going on top is only going to make a 1/2 inch difference. So one differentiation from the original plan, it's not going to be exactly 8 foot. It's going to be 8 foot and what, just shy of a 1/2 inch more, so whatever. So now I'm going to sand these because I want to clean them up just a little bit, clean those edges, and get off all of this because obviously these are construction grade studs and I don't want that to show. So I'm going to sand that down and just clean them up and soften the edges, which I do on all of my hand milled pieces anyway. So I'm going to get those done and we're going to put this cabinet together. So we are ready to start on the cabinet. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to sand the plywood because my plywood is garbage. So let me do that real quick and then we'll start putting this thing together. Alright, so now that I got this piece sanded, this is going to be my outside edge. So, I'm going to take one of these freshly sanded pieces with the dado facing in this way, and one over here with the dado facing in this way. And I'm going to flip my board so that the sanded side is down that way. And all we're going to do is line it up to this. This is going to be our top edge here. So I want these to fit just inside, like that. Make sure that they're where they need to be. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a 1-inch brad and put it in my brad nailer, run a line of glue, and pop this baby in place. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the 2 sides facing opposite of each other, and I'm going to attach the top. Because it's so high, I'm just going to drive screws right through into the end grain and just add a little bit of glue. It's going to be fine. On the bottom though, I'm going to screw in from the sides. So the one difference that we're going to make is the top piece is 48 inches across. So the bottom piece, we got to do a little bit of math and cut it down a little bit. So the way we're going to do this is pretty simple. All that we have to do is come over here and I'm going to take off 3 inches. Now remember, so we're going, board's going to be on this side. I want to do 3 inches to the outer kerf. And that's going to give me my 45. which is gonna go on the inside.
Now the next thing we're going to do here is the top. Now we've already got this piece of plywood cut, but I'm going to go ahead and trim this out first before we attach it, just because it's easier that way and because we need to bulk it up. When we cut this, we only cut 18 inches. It needs to be at least 20 inches to reach across the front. So the first thing we're going to do is take our piece of plywood. So this is 18 by 48. Okay, and we're going to add two 48-inch long 1-inch strips. Okay, so we're going to add one 1-inch strip back here, one 1-inch strip up here. Okay, and that's going to bulk it up a little bit. Now it's going to be 1 inch by 1/2 inch. Okay, so it's going to be a real thin piece, but that's all right. And then we're going to go ahead and do, these are going to be 1 inch by 1 inch square pieces, and we're going to attach them just to the top edge here. So if this is your piece of plywood laying down, this is the top, this is the bottom, we're going to attach our 1 inch by 1 inch pieces here on the side. Okay, and here on the front. So we'll have a little bit of a lip, about a 1/2 inch lip sticking up over the top. We're doing that on purpose, and I'll show you why later. So for now, we need two 1 inch by 1 inch exact pieces at 48 inches. And then we're also going to need an 8-foot 1 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch exact at 8 foot. And this is going to be our trim that's going to go around, be mitered, come around, be mitered, come around, be flat right there. Okay, and that's going to bulk up our top, help keep it from flexing, and also it's going to be our outermost trim once everything is attached. Alright, so for this first mitered piece, it's going to go across the front. From long point to long point, we're going to cut our 45s facing into each other. Okay, long point to long point, 49 3/8 inches. No more, no less. If you have to do a slightly wider miter to make it perfect, go for it, but that's what you should need. 49 3/8. Now for the sides here, you've got two options. I vote you do both. The first is to line up your miters so that that corner is really tight, really nice, and then take your writing utensil and mark the very back here, and that's going to be your cut. Boom. Perfect. Option number two is to take the piece that you've already got and measure it at 20 inches and 7/8. Okay, so that's 20 and 7/8 inches. 20 and 7/8. Okay, listen to what I'm saying. 20 and 7/8 inches. You can do that for both sides, assuming that everything is going to line up perfectly, which I am assuming that.
See, this one is just a touch long, and the miter doesn't meet as tight as I would like it to. It's not perfect. Okay, so I'm going to cut this one at 20 7/8, but take off a 1/16. But the easiest way to do it, guys, is just cut a miter longer than, let's say, cut it at 21 inches, and then mark here and go back and cut it off. It's easy. Alright, so I am at the end of my line here. This thing is too big for my assembly table. So I'm going to put the bottom in, and then I'm actually going to take it outside and put it on some sawhorses to complete the build. Just because it's pretty massive, and I'm going to start needing 2 people. It's not too heavy. It's way too big. So I'm not going to be able to move it around my shop. So if you're building this in a garage or something, make sure you've got a nice cleared out space. My shop's only about maybe 10, 11 feet wide from wall to wall. So if you got a good sized garage, you've got enough room. I don't, because I've got the saws and crap in my way. So I'm going to get the bottom put on, take this baby outside, and then we will start working on the back, the shelves, the door, and I'll show you guys how to build the hardware. Alright guys, so pay attention. This is a crucial step. If you're following along, doing it exactly the way that I'm doing it. If not, figure it out on your own. But across the front of this, I'm going to have a 2x4 that's going to be the front face. I'm going to cut it down, but I need the 1.5 inch thickness to start there. We're going to cut that later, so don't worry about it for now. But I've also got to have a little bit of spacing off the back here for our front face trim. So I cut 2 small pieces of 1x2 that were leftovers. And I'm going to stick those on top of this 1.5 inch thick piece. Now the reason I'm doing that is so that, because this is the back up here, that's the front is the bottom. So I'm going to lay this up, and when I put it in place like this, now you can see it's pretty much touching in the back. It's actually off just a little bit from where I want it to be, but I'll be able to match this up so that it sits perfectly flat across the back here, and I can attach the backing, and then later on this will be replaced with my trim in the front. So I'm going to get to work attaching this thing and get it out of here. Alright guys, so before we go any further, we're going to cut the backing. Now I've got the whole cabinet put together, but it is going to wobble left and right just a little bit, and I want to go ahead and get the back on it while it's in this position face down. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take that piece of underlayment and I'm going to cut it square, okay? Now, we're going to cut it, it's already 48, so we're going to take off 1 inch to make it 47. And then lengthwise, we're going to do 89.5, and that's going to fit from the very bottom flush all the way up to about 1/4 inch shy of the top. So again, that's 89.5 long and 47 across the top and bottom. So I'm out of room in the shop. I'm going to take this table saw outside and make this cut, attach this thing, and then we'll switch them. Cutting a large sheet of plywood, I do not recommend doing it the way that I just did. It works for me. So I've got the cabinet up on its side. Now the first thing I've got to do is take this center piece, and that actually needs to be cut by 1/2 inch. It's just 1/2 inch too long. And then I'm going to use the shelves to prop it up sideways in the cabinet and put the other 2 shelves on top, basically dry fitting everything to make sure that it fits where it's supposed to fit, and I can make any adjustments at that point if I need to. So again, if you're building this at home in your garage, you know, you've got the space to do this, but just in case any of your cuts weren't perfect, this is the time that we're gonna fix that problem and make sure that our math was correct, which with me, it probably wasn't. There we go, so it's not perfect, but I'm gonna put the other 2 shelves in, take some measurements, and make sure that we're all good here, and get this baby socked down tight. Alright guys, so I'm not that good at math, I warned you that, but whatever. So take your shelves, and instead of 23 1/4, we actually need to cut them down to 22 1/4. I don't really know how I did my math wrong, other than I think I added 1.5, 1.5, plus half, which is 4. And it should have still only been 3 because I forgot we were doing the dado. So my bad guys, I apologize. But anyway, so take all 5 of your shelves, cut them down to 22 1/4. And then we're going to stick those back in here, get this shelf, put these 2 top shelves, again, dry fit everything one more time, and then sock this baby down in the center where it's supposed to go, and get moving on this project. Meantime, my neighbor just brought me a bunch of eggs, so I'm going to take these up to the house and then come back out and get finished up on this once the sun sets. And there we go, ladies and germs. That is a really good fit. There we go. So these are going to be lower, those are going to be closer together, but roughly you get the idea. So, since this actually worked out really, really well, now I know that this center shelf is exactly where it's supposed to be, so I'm going to go ahead and put some screws in the bottom and the top and turn it, put a chalk line across the back and pop in some brad nails to hold the backing in place, and then get this thing out of here so I can start working on the door. I want to do before I get this thing picked up is figure out exactly how far apart I want all of these shelves to be. So on the inside here we have 88.5 inches. So 87 inches divided by 3 is what? So 87 divided by 3 is 29. So up here, we're going to measure up 29 inches from the bottom, 29 inches from the top, and that's where those shelves are going to go. Now, the same 87 divided by 4 is 21 3/4. So, starting at the bottom, again, measure 21 3/4, mark it. From the top, 21 3/4, mark it. Now, from the bottom, again, 21 3/4 plus a half is 22 1/4. Add to that another 21, which is 43 1/4. And this is where the bottom of your center shelf is going to be. Okay? So from the bottom, you've marked the bottom of your bottom shelf, bottom of your center shelf, top of your top shelf. Up here, bottom of your bottom shelf, top of your top shelf. Okay? So I'm going to put the center one in, get some screws in it. Same thing with these two, put the 2 side screws in, put these in place, side screws, bring this whole thing down and do the screws from the outer 2 edges. That way all of my shelves are set. So, it's morning, we're back at it. Next thing we're going to do today is take our remaining 1x2s that we cut earlier, the leftovers from our 2x4s that we cut down, and we're going to cut these to fit as the trim on each of our shelves. So, just to be sure, I'm going to double check the measurements, but I believe we had 22 1/4 were the front of our shelves there. And it looks like we're just shy of 22 1/4. Yeah. I'm going to put these on the chop saw, and just to make sure that they're as close to perfect as I can, I'm going to mark 22 1/4, and I'm going to put the outer kerf right on that black mark, okay? The reason I'm doing that is because I can actually cut the black mark off and get a slightly more accurate cut. Alright, now this part should be pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to run a piece all the way across the bottom. So, measuring real quick, edge to edge. This is just shy of 45, like a 1/16 shy of 45. So, you can pre-cut that based on my measurements, but if I were you, I'd get out in your shop and measure it. Make sure that it's the length you want it to be. Now, I'm going to use a 2x4 for the base of this, and the reason being, check how tall this is. That's right at 2 inches, okay? So with the 2x4 that I've shaved the edge off so that it's cut square, it's gonna still be 1.5 inches thick, which gives me 1/2 inch of clearance to the front here, but it's gonna be a little bit shy. It's gonna be about 3 inches total. So that's gonna be my depth right there at the bottom. So you'll have this nice little drop lip with a nice thick bottom. All the fronts here. Now again, one of the reasons I want this to be 1.5 inches thick is because I'm also going to have a 3/4 inch piece here. So even this bottom piece is not going to stick all the way out front, and the barn door is still going to hang out, you know, just 3/4 inch or so out in front of this, but that's all right. We'll get to that in a minute. So for now, get yourself a 2x4, cut off the round edges, and cut it to size. Alright, so I'm almost done putting the cabinet itself together. The last thing I'm going to do is take this last bit of 2x4 and I'm going to rip this down into 2 pieces. And I'm going to grab my measurements here in a minute. I would give them to you, but again, if you're building along with me, I highly recommend that you measure off your own piece so that you don't have any gaps and you get real nice tight edges and stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up on my table saw. You could use a thicknessing planer or a bandsaw, but to be honest, this is one of the easier, quicker ways to do it. And I know most of you guys out there don't have a ton of woodworking tools, so a nice 10-inch table saw, we can do this really easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to rip the round edges off, and we're going to cut the piece so that it's really just about 3/4 inch thick. And then with that, we're going to cut them to length and put it on our piece. And that's going to be the top piece where our hardware is going to hang. So let me show you how to do that real quick. And then we can get this cabinet out of the way and get started on the door, get this project finished up. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and get started on the door. This is going to be a little beefier than you might expect from just a thin little sheet of plywood, but we're going to build up a nice frame, make it nice and thick, which will be really cool. The reason I'm going to do that is because I normally hate making barn doors with plywood, but it just happened to work for this project. It's going to be cheaper, more affordable, and go a lot quicker. So, with that being said, if you're working from home, this is a really good way to do it. If you're building this for yourself, or for someone you know, because this just comes right out of the sheets of plywood you already had. So, our main thing is, it is already 22¼ inches across. Now, when I did my math earlier, that worked out really well, because up against the pantry, essentially from one edge to that center post where the trim is 22 and just shy, actually, I'm sorry, of 22 inches. So this being 22¼ is going to slightly overlap that. But with the look I'm going for, we're actually going to add a full 1.5 inches because we're going to be doing 3/4 inch framing all the way around it. And that's going to push it up to, let me do some math, 23¾ inches. So it'll extend all the way, so when you have it closed on one side or the other, it's going to look like you have a door and open shelving, as opposed to a door and then some trim and then some open shelving. Just a personal choice. If you like it better where you can see the doors a little smaller and maybe it doesn't cover all of the trim, or maybe you've done some of your math wrong up to this point, this is the point to fix it. Adjust the size. But for now, again, we have our initial cut from the very beginning of this project, 22½ inches. So it's actually going to sit, I'm sorry, right at 24 inches wide, which is really what I wanted to begin with. I wanted a 24-inch door to fit trim to edge, so no matter what side you put it on. So 22½, or make it smaller if you want. I forgot how long I'm supposed to cut this, and I think it's still at 8 foot. It is. So I'm gonna go out and measure my piece and see how tall I want it to be. All right, we got a little bit of wind out here today, so sorry if the microphone goes wonky. So something to remember when doing this is that it's not gonna touch the very bottom. We're gonna give it a little bit of space to move and swing, and it's also not gonna make it all the way to the top. But it is gonna cover the top just a bit. So if I measure from the bottom, from the top of the bottom trim to the bottom of the top trim, I get just shy of 85, or just over 85. So maybe 85 and an eighth. Same here. And assuming this piece is perfectly level, anyway, assuming this piece is perfectly level, yeah, I'm 85 and a 16th there. And 85 and an eighth there. So I've still got some sanding to do anyway, so that'll take off that 16th inch variance. But so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my door down so that with the framing on it, it will be less than 85 and a quarter. So that'll give it enough room that it'll still move here, but it's going to cover up there because I don't want a visible gap. But at the same time, it's also 8 feet in the air, and my client is shorter than me. So she probably won't care. So what I'm going to do to preserve as much room as I can, knowing that I'm going to have the barn door hardware and the track up there, I need almost that entire 3 inches for the track and the wheels to be able to move. 85 and an eighth, so I'm going to cut it down to 84 and 7/8. Now, here's the thing. I'm not marking this because this is my cut line. I'm marking this because that's how I want it to be when it's done. Okay? So again, over here, 84 and 7/8. Now, measure your pantry. Make sure that everything's just like mine, and if it's not, measure it accordingly and do your own math. But I wound up needing to cut my plywood at 83 and 3/8. Okay? So, 22 and a half wide, 83 and 3/8 tall. We're going to put a 3/4 inch trim all the way around it, face it, and then we'll get started on the hardware. So, 22 and a half across, 83 and 3/8 tall, and then I'm going to, and then we're going to add a 3/4 inch frame all the way around and face the whole thing to look like a barn door. Call it a day, and then we will get started on the hardware. One more side note before we start cutting our plywood. You've got those 1x4s that we purchased when we picked up the plywood. That's what we're going to use for our top and bottom and face trim. But if you have any more 2x4 leftover pieces or whatever scrap you've got, you should have some 2x4 strips left from doing your trim. So we're going to use that to do our 2 longest side frames and the top and bottom frames. So what you need to do is grab some of those scraps, which I've got some right here. So I don't know how this worked out for you at home, but for me, I wound up with this 1 inch by 1.5 inch and this basically 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch. So what I'm going to do is actually cut these down. Instead of 1.5 inch, we're going to cut it down to 1.25 inch this way. Okay? Because it's going to be laying, your plywood is going to be flat, and it's going to be laying and attached to your plywood, and then you're going to have a 3/4 inch face going across and your boards and stuff like that. So 1.25, maybe just a touch over 1.25, and we're going to do the full length, top to bottom, twice, and then and then the entire top and the entire bottom plus 1.5 inches for the top piece and the bottom piece. Okay, so if that was confusing, rewind, go back and figure it out. But so I'm going to cut this to 1.25 inch lengthwise. Make sure this is 3/4 inch thick, which this might be too thick, so I'm going to cut that down to 3/4 inch thick and cut 2 of them at the exact same length, the 83 and 3/8 inches that I've got, and then after that we will cut our face boards. So what I've just done is cut pieces to fit inside the top, bottom, and middle of this door. Now, I cut them at 22.5 with I just cut on the very edge of my line so that the kerf was outside of the 22.5 inches. And the reason being is because I want this to be a very tight fit. That's going to help this door stay rigid because yellow pine plywood is notorious for twisting and bending. So I'm going to take my 3 pieces. I want the curve of the grain to be facing down. That way, should the wood decide it ever wants to bow, it's going to bow inward towards the plywood. So, nice tight fit, like you wouldn't believe. And then this one, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be as tight. Partly because I probably cut it a little too close to the line, and partly because those two are so tight they're probably pushing this out a little bit. But with that being said, pretty simple way to tack these down. We're going to use 1-inch brad nails that are 18 gauge. And you can see those are just barely longer than the 3/4 inch thick pieces that we're using here. I've got 1 inch loaded up in my nail gun here. I am going to pull these back off so that I can put the glue underneath of them. Now the way I like to do this is just flip it up on this side and then just make a squiggly line like that and drop it back down. Nice and tight. Make sure this corner is pushed down as tight as possible. Boom, jam it in there. Put one on each corner and one in the center. This wood's not really big enough that it's going to expand and contract too much, so I'm not super worried about that. And then I like to go across the top, 3 more, and then across the bottom, alternating where I go. That's now clad on there, which is looking pretty good. I'm going to move on and get these set. Alright, so a pretty easy way to measure and figure out where this is going to go. I've got 76.25 inches between that board and this board. So 36 3/8 from the bottom, 36 3/8 from the top is exactly where this centerpiece is going to go. I'm going to go ahead and mark it all the way across. Alright, so at this point you have one of 2 choices. You can either just lay the boards down and measure your angles by using a pen and trying to cut along that line on your chop saw, or you can use some cool tools. Now I've got this stainless steel protractor thing that was way too expensive for what it is, and this old drafting tool that I think I can use to get angles, but I'm not that good at this kind of stuff anyway. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and try to measure these angles and then try to remeasure these angles on my saw and hope that I can get the measurement cut right the first time. Alright, so according to my handy dandy protractor, I'm at 63 degrees. So I have to figure out how to cut 63 degrees on my saw. Alright, so here I've got a piece of cedar, and what I'm going to do is this is angled at 45. So if I do my math properly, if I put this on here at 45 degrees, I need to get to 63. So 45 plus 20 is 65. So we're going to add 22 right there. Alright, so I figured it out, and you probably figured it out before me, but it takes me a while because I'm not that bright. Math. It's hard. This is 45 degrees. I need to get to 63 degrees. Instead of adding 23, I need to add 18. So, 45 degree block here. This is screwed in place and clamped to be a jig, and then I can set this up against here nice and tight. Once this is in place, put a little extra over here. This combination of 45 plus 18 actually gives me the angle that I was looking for earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a cut. And there you go. Now for this part, guys, I wish that I could make it simpler, but I just can't. Trial and error. If you're a DIYer, this is one of the best ways to do it, is not to worry about all the crazy math and really frustrate yourself. Just keep doing it. See, so I'm off by about ½ inch here, which I didn't realize. So I'm going to mark it by eyeballing it, but I also know that when I go to put it in my jig, it's not going to make it this far. So let me cut this real quick. So I was wrong. It actually cut exactly on the line. So if I place this back, look at that. Super tight, edge to edge, corner to corner. And I got the angle as close to perfect as a quick and dirty project like this can be. So if you got one of these, use it. If you don't have one of these, I recommend you go get one. Don't go to your local wood store unless you really want to support them, because they're going to be really expensive there. Also, in the immortal words of Jimmy Buffett, math sucks. Alright, so one more piece I want to make and then we're done. When I put the sliders, the two supports with the wheels on the door, one of them is going to go across the crossbeam. The other one doesn't really have anything to grab onto on the bottom half. So I'm going to cut this 1.5. Basically, it's a 1x2. So I'm going to cut this because it's 1.5. I'm going to cut it to a length of 5.5 inches, and that's going to be the bottom support for the right hand, or I suppose I'm looking at it from the top, the left hand side. Anyway, you'll see it. Alright, so it is finally time to start on the hardware. So, here's what we're going to need. I already showed you all the other hardware we're going to need, so for now what we're going to do is, using our steel bars at 48 inches, we're going to cut down to 44 1/2 inches. And this is just going to be scrap. Now, if you bought a second piece, you're going to cut two 1-foot bars, or 12-inch bars, to be the hangers on the door. Now if you are frugal and you bought yourself a 6-foot section, you're going to cut here, which is going to be 44.5 inches, and then you're going to cut just past that from the other end, cut 1 foot, and then cut another foot, and your scrap will be somewhere in the middle here. But for my purposes today, I have a 48-inch section and 2 scrap pieces, so I'm going to cut right here, which is 44.5 inches from the far end. So now it is time to start drilling our holes. So I went through and I measured and I marked at the center point on the metal bar. That's going to be the top support. I marked at 1 inch, I marked at 11.5 inches, and I marked at 22.25 inches. Then I flipped it over, marked again at 1 inch and 11.5 inches, and then my 22.25 lined up, give or take a little bit. So I'm going to put that on the drill press, go ahead and get those drilled out, and then I'm going to take my 1 foot sections and drill out 2 holes towards the bottom. So one's going to be 1 inch off the bottom, one's going to be about 6 inches off the bottom, and then one at the very top, like about maybe 1/2 inch from the top, or 3/4 inch from the top. Alright guys, so I'm about to give you my secret to the awesomest, easy DIY barn door hardware. Side note, if you're going to try to do this for a piece that you're selling professionally, either don't do it or don't give me credit for it. But if you're doing this for yourself, or you know, just putting it in your own home, I've done this on all of my personal pieces, and this is a very quick and easy way to do this hardware. You might find a bunch of these kind of instructions online, especially right here on YouTube, but just the quick and dirty, this is the easiest way. Now I've also got another barn door hardware project on here with a dual sliding barn door console, and I go a little more in depth on how to really get into the nitty gritty and make this thing with proper nuts and bolts and all that jazz, but I figured this way out a little bit later after I made that video, and I kind of like it as far as, like I said, doing these projects for yourself, doing a simple, easy, small barn door hardware. So check this out. So the first thing you're going to need to do is switch out your smaller bit that fits the number 6 drywall screws for a 1/4 inch bit, and you want to make sure that that thing is nice and sharp because we're going to be cutting through steel. Now again, the reason we're using the 1/8 inch steel is because it's going to give us the most room for the spacer we're putting in, and also it's very rigid. So make sure to use some sort of lubricant, and just definitely keep this thing wet so it doesn't overheat and it doesn't ruin your bit. Boom. Alright guys, here's what makes this next part super easy. So you take your pulley, all you have to do is pull out this cotter pin. Once that thing is out, don't throw it away. Pull out this center pin, pull out your wheel, get rid of that. Now with this hole you just drilled on the topmost part, you want to slide this piece all the way through as tight as it'll go, put your wheel on, and then slip that cotter pin back through the hole. It might be kind of... This is why I normally do things on the table. I have zero coordination. Get that piece in there, get that pin set, and now this can still spin freely. It doesn't really move a whole lot because if you did it right, this pin is going to be really tight in there, which is why I had to hammer it into place. And then also, it may have a little bit of movement forward and backward, but in my experience I've found out over time that that movement is perfectly acceptable, because trying to put the spacer inside of here, like I've shown in my previous video and like a lot of people recommend online, is fine and good, and if you do it right and you've got the time, it makes for a really nice moving, gliding wheel. For this purpose, it's 2 small wheels that are going to move less than 24 inches each. That's more than adequate. That right there was more than 24 inches. So the fact that it can move back and forth a little bit is fine, because you can see it's not going to twist enough to stop itself. The cotter pin doesn't stop it, and it's not rubbing against the steel. It doesn't need spacers, it doesn't need washers, it doesn't need anything. You can see that even under load, I'm pulling down as hard as I can on this piece. It's rolling just fine. And that's great. So these are done. Now the next part's pretty simple. All we're going to do is take that 1/2 inch tube that we got at the hardware store earlier, and we're going to measure in just above an inch. I don't want it to be as short as 1 inch because it doesn't give me enough room for the door to not be connecting to the wood behind it, but I also don't want it to be a full 1 1/4 inch where it's all the way out. So really around 1 1/8 of an inch is going to be your best bet. So we're going to mark that, and then we're going to use a pipe cutter to cut that. This guy. If you don't have one of these, go get one. It's in the plumbing section of your big box store. It might even be where these were, but most likely not. Where I go, these are with the metal, where you get your weldable metal and steel and whatnot. These are in the plumbing section, but these are pretty cheap. Anywhere from $2 for a really crappy one to $5 to $8 for a good one like this. This is a general number 120 with a little guide on it. So I like it. It works for me. Go get you one. Alright, so here we go. Just as a reminder, 44.5 inch steel bar. Got all the holes drilled. 5 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch tubes. 2 of these guys, a foot long. Got these at like 3/4 inch and I think 8 or 9 inches. I can't remember, I think 8. And then 3/4 inches from the top. I've got a 1/4 inch hole. Put those through with the cottering pin. I'm also going to use 5 2-inch number 6 drywall screws. That's what's going to go through here. I'm also going to use 9 of these finish washers. Now, the reason we're going to use these specifically was because when they go on, they slide all the way up, everything gets screwed in, and then it sits nice and flush in that end. And it looks really nice when it's done that way. So, I have 9, 5 for this, 2 for each of those. The last thing I'm going to need is 4 1-inch number 6 drywall screws, and those are for these holes here. So let's go ahead and get this stuff put on the piece. Now guys, here's the way that on this particular project I choose to set this up so that it works. This time, since it's laying on its back, I've got it in my finishing room. It's going to rain tomorrow, so I didn't want to leave it outside. What I'm going to do is measure this from the bottom, and I can adjust it later if need be when I go to stand it up, but it should be pretty level. So what I want to do here is basically imagine that this thing is attached to the door. Now, just to double check, so I just double checked and it is 84 3/4 for my door, but I know it's 85 1/4 for my cabinet. But again, here's the deal. I'm gonna, down at that end, I've got the tape measure roughly 1/4 inch off the bottom, and I've got my finger stopping the tape measure at 81 3/4, which when you add 3 inches, which is what my tape measure tells me to do right here, plus 3 inches, I get 84 3/4. So the back of my tape measure right here is actually where the top of the door is going to be. Now I can see by looking straight down that I'm now above this lip, this way, above it, by about 1/4 inch. So what I want to do is line up my track so that this is going to sit just above that door. And I've got to have enough room that the roller's not going to hit, but I also want to leave enough meat on the wood down here that it is supported. So if I put it right about there, I'm going to pull this out and route that straight down. Okay? That gives me 1.5 inches of clearance from the top and 1/2 inch of clearance from the bottom. So I'm going to line up this center point, give it a little pre-drill, and back it back out. I'm going to put the spacer in place, set this on top, with that going all the way through. Find my hole, there she is, and zip it on down. Look at that. Boom. And that should give me just enough clearance that with this thing on, there you go. So now I'm not hitting the top here, I'm not hitting the trim here, and it's got room to move. Now remember, it's only going to move from here to there and back to here. Now something to keep in mind right now is that I'm not going to be able to get these wheels up on this track without moving it. So when I go to the client's house, I'm going to have to unscrew part of this track and pull it off, slide the wheels on, and then they'll be in place. But that's okay, because that also means it can't jump the track, it can't come off. So let's get putting the rest of this thing on. Now before I start painting tomorrow, there is one more thing I want to do to the steel. Now it won't affect the screws, it won't affect the washers or the spacers or the wheels because they're all stainless steel and brass and whatnot, but the raw steel here and here, the parts that's already dark, I can actually turn those black without painting them, without having to powder coat them or anything like that. And this is really cool. If you've seen some of my other videos from way back when I first started the channel, there's a product, you can get it at Walmart. It is called Super Blue. There's a product that is called Liquid Gun Blue. I don't know why it's called blue, because it turns everything black. So it should be called Super Black, but I don't know. So what I'm going to do is take this with gloves on, because it is highly corrosive, put it on a paper towel and rub that paper towel all the way across the black steel. Make sure that it's nice and wet, and just let it sit on it for a minute. Keep rubbing it a couple of times, 2, 3, 4 times, because that'll constantly spread out the super blue, but it'll also keep it from oxidizing, because this basically is a black oxidation on the steel. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'm actually going to do it when I take the hardware off. So I'm going to go ahead, take this hardware off, do the super blue, and then go ahead and get this thing painted. Thanks a lot, guys, for checking out this project. If you're doing it at home, I recommend that you watch this video all the way through, take some notes, and make sure that you've got all your measurements and everything written down and prepared. Double check everything that I say. Make sure that if I change something that you need to change as well, write that down on the notes, and then go ahead and start your project and use this video as a reference. If you are going to change it and make it a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, whatever, go for it. You know, just make sure you're doing your math right. For those of you out there who want to just DIY this for yourself, hey, go for it. It's awesome. Anybody out there who thinks this would be a great project to sell, it is. So go for it. I don't care. Just make sure to give me credit if you can. So that's pretty much it, guys. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you enjoy doing this DIY. Definitely make sure that you subscribe for more. I'm going to be doing a couple of giveaways here later, and I've also got a lot of DIYs, quick tips, and of course always my monthly, if I can get them out that often, updates on what's going on at my shop. like, subscribe, tell a friend about it. We'll talk to you guys later.